In Taos, New Mexico, some residents hear a low, pulsing hum that others cannot detect. They describe it as a distant diesel engine, an electrical drone, or a vibration with no source. Experts and scientists have found only silence, and tonight, we'll take a look at the investigation.
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
Late at night, in the quiet desert town of Taos, New Mexico, silence begins to change. For most people, there's nothing unusual. No engine, no machinery, no vibration in the walls. But for a few, the sound is unmistakable. A low hum, a distant diesel, a pulse that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. Residents search their homes, they shut off the power, they step outside and listen for a truck that never arrives. Scientists come with microphones, antennas, magnetometers, and geophones. They look for sound in the air, vibration in the ground, electromagnetic fields, secret transmissions, and hidden machinery. The instruments only record silence. The hearers keep hearing the hum. Tonight, we're exploring the Taos Hum, one of the most famous unexplained sound mysteries in America, where science, tinnitus, conspiracy, government secrecy, and human perception collide in the space between what can be measured and what cannot be ignored. So make sure you're subscribed to hear a new episode every Monday. Now let's see what all the buzz is about. Spring, 1993, 4 o'clock in the morning. Guitarist and music teacher Steve Walters is asleep inside his Taos home after several days of deliberate quiet. He's been treating the week like a personal retreat. Yoga, meditation, long stretches without the usual noise of daily life. Then a dream tears through the stillness. In it, a souped-up Pontiac GTO is idling directly outside his bedroom window. The engine isn't roaring. It's simply there, low and heavy, cycling with no end. The vibration feels menacing because it refuses to alter. Walters wakes abruptly, but the engine doesn't stop. He lies still and listens. The car from the dream is gone. However, the sound remains. Walters gets out of bed and searches the house. No appliance is running. Nothing outside explains it. He moves from room to room, then shuts off the circuit breakers, cutting electricity to the entire home. The lights die. The house becomes as silent as he can make it. The low pulsing continues. Quote, "It was very Stephen King-ish." That is when Walters realizes he's not hearing a malfunction or the echo of a nightmare. He's hearing the thing neighbors have been trying to describe. A distant engine with no vehicle. a vibration with no visible machinery, a sound that seems to occupy the space just beyond ordinary hearing. By daylight, Taos will look unchanged. The desert will stretch beneath the Sangre de Cristo mountains. Adobe walls will catch the morning sun. Most residents hear nothing unusual, but for Walters, silence has acquired a pulse. And once he recognizes it, the Taos Hum is waiting whenever the world becomes quiet enough to listen. The Taos Hum did not begin with a scientist or a government report or even a single dramatic event. It began privately, inside homes where people could not explain why quiet no longer felt quiet at all. Taos sits in northern New Mexico, where open land and high elevation can make distance feel almost tangible. In a place known for landscape, art, and stillness, an unexplained mechanical drone felt especially intrusive. Even among hearers, descriptions varied. Sarah Allen compared it to a distant tractor. Casey Grams described throbbing power lines with a thin whine. Photographer Bob Saltzman heard low grinding, static like hissing, and a higher ring. Others reached for the image that would become most common: a diesel engine idling beyond the horizon. Those differences are worth considering. A single machine should, in theory, produce a measurable signal with recognizable characteristics. The Taos reports behaved more like overlapping impressions. Some hearers described one tone, others perceived layers, pulses, or a sensation bordering on vibration. Some found it nearly continuous, others noticed it only at particular hours or locations. Most people in the same rooms heard nothing. Katanya Saltzman said she first became aware of the sound in May of 1991. Bob noticed it roughly 2 weeks later. Once they both recognized it, the hum became part of their home life. At night, they played ocean wave recordings to mask it, just enough to fall asleep. Katanya reported difficulty with balance and concentration. The couple eventually spent 2 months in South Carolina, seeking relief, only to face the larger question: if the sound followed them or reappeared elsewhere, what exactly were they escaping? Music gave some hearers a more precise vocabulary. Walters described a low throb rather than an ordinary ringing tone, while musicians consulted by investigators placed the hum near a low E-flat, around 41 hertz. A trained ear can identify pitch without identifying origin. The narrow range deepened the puzzle. People reported something organized enough to imitate, yet the room itself seemed too quiet to explain it. It's important not to turn every symptom into proven medical evidence. People associated the hum with sleeplessness, headaches, anxiety, nausea, chest sensations, and fatigue, but the investigation never established one source capable of producing all of those effects. What was documented was the distress itself. Disrupted sleep and constant vigilance can become their own burden. Casey Grams first searched for something wrong in her old adobe home. When she couldn't find it, she tried to live around the noise. Then she went camping about 30 miles away and heard it there too. The experience was frightening because it removed the most comforting explanation. A broken pump can be repaired, a neighbor's generator can be located, but a sound that survives a change of scenery begins to feel less like an object and more like a pursuer. Months later, at a potluck supper connected to her son's school, a stranger asked whether she heard a hum. Grams nearly burst into tears. Quote, "It's such a relief to know you're not crazy and not alone." That relief explains why the story grew. The Saltzmans began asking questions publicly, circulating an informal survey, and speaking with people who had believed they were isolated cases. More than 100 contacts were reported in early press coverage. Residents attended local meetings, compared descriptions, and wrote officials. The result was not a neat catalog of one phenomenon. It was a community, discovering that many people had independently given similar names to experiences they couldn't prove to anyone standing right beside them. There was also a social danger in speaking up. An invisible sound heard by only a small minority invites ridicule. Later technical writing on unexplained hums would emphasize that those reporting them did not appear to be mentally infirm, despite the mockery they would sometimes receive. The problem wasn't only the noise, it was being required to defend the fact that the experience existed at all. The Saltzmans pushed the issue toward Washington. Representative Bill Richardson initially admitted he had regarded the complaints as coming from some of his more colorful constituents. But the number and consistency of reports persuaded him that dismissal was not enough. Richardson and other members of New Mexico's congressional delegation sought federal attention. That decision brought suspicion into the story. New Mexico was inseparable from secret military research, nuclear laboratories, and restricted testing. If residents feared an unseen government system, the landscape itself seemed to supply reasons. Richardson publicly entertained the possibility of a defense-related project. The Defense Department and Air Force denied responsibility. Neither position identified the source, and every denial could be read by a frightened hearer as reassurance or further proof of secrecy. By spring of 1991, the question had become too public to ignore. A team of roughly a dozen investigators assembled from the University of New Mexico Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratories, and the Air Force's Phillips Laboratory. Because some residents suspected government involvement, the inquiry was presented as open and public, rather than a closed examination conducted only by federal laboratories. The scientists arrived with microphones, antennas, magnetometers, geophones, and recorders. Taos had spent 2 years asking whether anyone else could hear what they heard. Now the instruments would be asked the same question. Before searching for a source, the 1993 team had to define what a successful explanation would need to account for. Interviews suggested 3 central traits. The hum was selective. Only a small fraction of residents perceived it. It was persistent. Many hearers encountered it at least weekly. And it was widespread. Similar reports came from beyond one neighborhood, sometimes far beyond Taos itself. Those traits made ordinary detective work difficult. If a factory fan is loud enough to disturb a community, microphones should detect it, and more than a few people should notice. If the sound exists only inside one listener's auditory system, geography should matter less. The Taos Hum appeared to borrow features from both possibilities, while fitting neither cleanly. The investigation was coordinated by University of New Mexico engineer Joe Mullins and included researchers from Los Alamos, Phillips Laboratory, Sandia, and the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center. Their specialties were important because the hum crossed so many boundaries. Acousticians could search the air, geophysicists could search the ground, electrical engineers could examine fields and transmissions. Hearing scientist James Kelly could ask whether the missing source was not outside the listener at all, but somewhere between inner ear and brain. The team began with the hearers. Then people took part in matching tests inside a guest house bedroom near the rural home of Bob and Katanya Saltzman. Investigators played a controllable low-frequency tone through a speaker and asked each participant to adjust it until it resembled the hum. 8 of the 10 reproduced their chosen match with notable consistency. Their selected carrier frequencies ranged from about 32 to 80 hertz, near the lowest portion of normal human hearing. The pulse or modulation they added ranged from roughly half a cycle to 2 cycles per second. The matching levels complicated the picture. Participants generally chose amplitudes near or below standard hearing sensitivity in that range. The test showed what the hum resembled, but not how loud an external source would have to be. It revealed pitch and pulse without proving that a matching wave was moving through the room. To capture anything present, the team built an extraordinary detector. An 18-inch woofer was repurposed as an ultra-sensitive low-frequency microphone. With its enclosure, the device weighed more than 150 pounds. The researchers nicknamed it the Big Ear and connected it to analysis equipment in a recreational vehicle parked at a distance, reducing the chance that their own machinery would contaminate the measurements. The hearers could create sounds resembling what they perceived. The Big Ear could not find a matching signal in the environment. At the Saltzman residence, the recorded background was estimated to be 15 to 20 decibels below accepted hearing thresholds in the relevant low-frequency range. Several participants said they could still hear the hum while that quiet background was being measured. Some reported another intriguing effect. When the generated test tone approached the hum they already perceived, they heard beats, a rhythmic waxing and fading that normally occurs when 2 nearby frequencies interact. If genuine, that would suggest a second physical tone was present. But similar beat reports could not be demonstrated reliably in controlled matching experiments involving tinnitus. The clue was provocative, not conclusive. The investigation expanded beyond acoustics. The Saltzman home and the Taos golf course became principal measurement sites, with additional readings around the region. Geophones listened for ground vibration. Magnetometers tracked low-frequency magnetic activity. Antennas and receivers surveyed electromagnetic signals from 20 Hz to 18 GHz. There were findings, but each led to somewhere ordinary. A strong 60 Hz harmonic appeared around Taos, consistent with the electrical power grid. Yet, hearers reported an intense hum near remote Tres Piedras, where investigators found little of that component. Natural Schumann resonances appeared normal. Radio and television transmissions were identifiable as exactly that. The seismic equipment offered the investigation's most human moment. One apparently massive event looked dramatic until the team discovered a gopher had been restoring a burrow obstructed by the geophone. The Earth had spoken, but not with the voice anyone was seeking. Researchers also examined a theory already spreading through the community: extremely low-frequency transmissions used by the United States Navy to communicate with submarines. They watched the relevant range around 65 to 75 hertz. Nothing rose above the noise. Considering the transmitter's location, antenna limitations, and the distance to northern New Mexico, the team concluded the Navy signal would be below local background levels. One investigator made the negative result especially unsettling. Sandia physicist Horace Poteet could hear the hum himself. Years later, he remembered it as sounding like a large diesel engine operating far away. This was not a room full of technicians telling residents that nothing was happening. One of the scientists shared the perception while his instruments remained silent. That distinction shaped the team's conclusion. They had not disproved the hearers. They had failed to detect an acoustic signal, seismic event, or unusual electromagnetic source that explained what hearers reported. Weak electromagnetic fields had no established mechanism by which they could become sound in the human ear. The grid signal did not fit the geography. The Navy theory did not fit the measurements. The microphones did not record the hum. Quote, "As a result, we are left with a mystery." But the week of fieldwork had revealed something valuable. 8 hearers could match the thing they perceived. Their choices clustered in a genuinely low range. The experience was not random, yet it did not correspond to a sound the equipment could capture. Investigators began shifting attention away from the desert toward the people themselves. They mailed questionnaires to 8,000 residents in Taos, Ranchos de Taos, Tres Piedras, Questa, Eagle Nest, and Penasco. The transmitter's search had produced silence. The next evidence would arrive in envelopes. Of the 8,000 surveys distributed across the Taos region, 1,440 were returned. Investigators classified 161 respondents as hearers. If every person experiencing the hum had answered, an assumption the researchers knew could not be guaranteed, the minimum estimate would be about 2% of the surveyed population. The number was small enough that an individual hearer could feel alone, yet large enough to resist dismissal. It also gave the phenomenon a rough shape. Most identified hearers were between 30 and 59. The gender split was nearly even. Nearly 2/3 most often perceived it between evening and morning, when ordinary environmental noise falls away. Around 80% encountered it at least weekly. The geographic answers created a deeper problem. Most people reported first noticing the hum in the immediate Taos area, but 19% said their first experience occurred more than 50 miles away. The team was not looking at a complaint confined to one road, one power substation, or one industrial site. Either a widespread source was reaching selective listeners, or many different experiences were being gathered beneath the same name. That second possibility is less cinematic than a hidden transmitter, but scientifically important. The Taos Hum may sound like one object. In practice, it could describe several low-frequency experiences that feel similar. One person might detect a real machine neighbors cannot hear. Another might experience tinnitus. A third might be affected by environmental noise, attention, hearing physiology, and sleep disruption. Tinnitus became one of the most obvious possibilities. The term doesn't mean a person is pretending, it simply means the perception of sound without an external acoustic source that would be audible to others. Although ringing is the stereotype, tinnitus can present as buzzing, roaring, hissing, clicking, or humming. It can be low or high, intermittent or constant, and it can interfere with sleep and concentration. In 1995, however, the Taos researchers could not simply stamp the case as tinnitus and walk away. Typical tinnitus matching often involved tones between 3 and 6,000 hertz. The Taos matches were dramatically lower, concentrated between roughly 30 and 80 hertz. Many hearers also located the sound outside themselves and insisted it interacted with test tones. The reported beats were not reliably reproduced, but they kept the external source question alive. The investigators proposed more detailed hearing tests, including low-frequency threshold comparisons and searches for spontaneous autoacoustic emissions, faint sounds generated by the inner ear itself. The human ear is not merely a passive microphone. The cochlea is an active biological system. In the 1990s, however, researchers did not have a demonstrated low-frequency emission capable of explaining the hum. Later studies returned to that possibility. In 2016, a questionnaire study examined 162 people who identified as hum hearers and focused on features such as beats with outside sounds, head-turning effects, and delayed return after air travel. 73% reported at least one. The author proposed that, for many respondents, the cochlea or semicircular canals might produce a rare, low-frequency form of tinnitus. But the conclusion was based on self-reported patterns, and not every respondent fit. A peer-reviewed study published in 2026 brought modern equipment to the same question. Researchers examined 28 people who perceived low-frequency sounds that most others couldn't hear, along with control groups. Participants who could match their percept selected a median frequency of 50 hertz, strikingly close to the band identified in Taos decades earlier. The study didn't find one decisive physical marker, only a few participants showed unusually sensitive low-frequency hearing. Researchers detected no spontaneous autoacoustic emissions in the low-frequency range, despite equipment designed to search for them. The results made low-frequency ear-generated emissions an unlikely general explanation. They argued that subjective low-frequency tinnitus was often plausible when no external source could be verified, while explicitly refusing to rule out real external sounds in individual cases. That caution is very important. The 2026 work was designed around auditory explanations. It did not test every environmental theory ever attached to the hum. Its sample was also small, yet it strengthened an idea the Taos team had begun confronting in 1993. The mystery may not yield a single mechanism, because the people gathered under the label may not all be experiencing the same thing. For some hearers, that can sound like evasion. They know the perception feels external. It may seem to occupy a room, a valley, or the space beyond a wall. But the brain normally constructs location from the signals it receives. A sound generated or misprocessed within the auditory system can still be experienced as though it exists outside the head. Calling that tinnitus would describe a physiological perception, not an imaginary one. The alternative is no simpler. If a faint external source exists, it may fluctuate, travel unusually through terrain and buildings, or remain audible only to people at the sensitive edge of low-frequency hearing. To prove it, investigators must record the correct signal at the precise moment a hearer perceives it, then show that changing the signal changes the experience. Taos never reached that standard. The survey had shown that the hum was real as a reported human experience. The instruments had shown that no obvious local source explained it. Hearing science offered plausible routes, but no universal answer. The mystery had divided in two: a sound outside the body that no microphone could find, or a sound within perception that felt as if it filled the world. The unresolved nature of Taos encouraged theories because uncertainty rarely remains empty. It attracts whatever a community already fears: industrial pollution, electrical infrastructure, military experiments, geology, or technologies too secret to name. Some possibilities were reasonable enough to test. Others grew because no ordinary explanation had closed the case. Industrial noise could not be dismissed in principle. Low-frequency sound travels efficiently, penetrates structures, and can be difficult to locate by ear alone. A later investigation in Kokomo, Indiana, showed how complicated a community hum could be. In 2003, investigators traced strong tones at 10 and 36 hertz to air compressors and a cooling tower at separate plants. The facilities installed controls, and follow-up measurements showed the tones had been reduced until they were no longer detectable above background at the same locations. Some residents reported relief. Most who had identified as affected did not. Kokomo did not prove their remaining experiences were unreal. It showed that the word hum could contain more than one problem at once: measurable industrial noise, heightened awareness, possible tinnitus, and perception that continued after the obvious source was removed. Taos, however, never produced even that partial mechanical solution. The electrical grid generated a prominent 60 Hz component, close to the matched frequencies, but the pattern weakened in places where hearers still reported a strong hum. No unusual acoustic tone rose from the background. Seismic monitoring found no relevant Earth movement. Electromagnetic measurements located known power, radio, and television signals, not an unexplained field aligned with the reports. The secret government theory survived because it offered a source powerful enough to be widespread and hidden enough to evade ordinary inspection. It also fit New Mexico's history, Los Alamos, nuclear testing, military ranges, and classified research. Richardson's early suspicion of a defense-related project gave the idea political legitimacy, even as the military denied responsibility. Yet, suspicion is not evidence. The 1993 team included scientists from the very national laboratories some residents distrusted. But it was coordinated through the University of New Mexico and structured as a public inquiry for that very reason. The team specifically examined the frequency band associated with naval extremely low frequency transmissions and found nothing above noise. The known transmitters were so distant that their signal should have been overwhelmed by local background in northern New Mexico. No released measurement tied a classified system to the hum. One bureaucratic episode later added more fuel. Writer Greg Long sought a Department of Energy document through the Freedom of Information Act. The Albuquerque Operations Office had withheld a draft report under an exemption protecting internal deliberation. In 1995, the department's appeals office found that officials had not adequately determined which portions were truly exempt and sent the matter back. The record confirms that a draft existed and had never been finalized or officially issued. It doesn't establish that the draft identified a weapon, transmitter, or concealed answer. Still, for people already worried about secrecy, the image was hard to resist. A government hum report sitting unfinished behind a legal exemption. Bureaucratic uncertainty looked uncomfortably similar to concealment, even when the public record did not prove a cover-up. As national coverage spread, people in other states and countries recognized their own experiences in the Taos descriptions. Joe Mullins received reports from across the United States, but he warned there was no way to know whether they involved the same sound. That warning has become more important with time. The phrase, "the hum," now operates as a global category, not the name of a demonstrated worldwide signal. This may be the central truth of the case. Taos gave the mystery a memorable home, but not necessarily a single birthplace. The reports could include faint external sounds, low-frequency tinnitus, unusual sensitivity, sleep-related attention, and mechanisms not yet identified. The fact that one explanation fits one hearer does not require it to fit the next. That plural answer can feel unsatisfying. A monster can be unmasked, a machine can be switched off, even a government program can eventually leave records. Multiple causes deny the story a clean ending. They also match the evidence better than pretending the investigation solved what it didn't. For the people who heard the hum, the absence of a source was not neutral. It meant no repair order, no authority responsible for stopping it, and no simple way to convince a spouse or neighbor. The Taos researchers did something essential even while failing to explain the phenomenon. They treated the hearers as witnesses to an experience worth studying. More than 3 decades after the field investigation, modern hearing research has narrowed possibilities but hasn't closed the case. Low-frequency subjective tinnitus appears capable of explaining many reports. Rare sensitivity and ordinary environmental sources can explain others. Ear-generated emissions have not emerged as a broad solution, and no evidence has established a single hidden transmission encircling Taos. So, imagine the town after midnight. The day's traffic is gone. The wind settles against the adobe walls. For most people, the quiet is complete. For a few, something begins at the threshold. A distant engine, a pressure, a pulse that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. They check the appliances, they step outside, they listen for a truck that never approaches. Some leave town and hear nothing. Some leave and discover the sound has come with them. The frightening possibility is not simply that an unknown machine is operating in the desert. It's that perception has become a locked room, an experience undeniable to the person inside it, and inaccessible to everyone, standing only a few feet away. In Taos, the instruments recorded silence. The hearers did not. And somewhere between those two facts, the hum continues. Terrifying and True is narrated by Enrique Couto. It's executive produced by Rob Fields and Bobbletopia.com. And produced by Dan Wilder. With original theme music by Ray Mattis. If you have a story you think we should cover on Terrifying and True, send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. And if you want to support us for as little as $1 a month, go to weeklyspooky.com/join. Your support for as little as $1 a month keeps the show going. And speaking of, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay a little bit more to hear their name at the end of the show. And they are Johnny Nix, Kate and Lulu, Jessica Fuller, Mike Eschewey, Jenny Green, Amber Hansford, Karen Wiemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much, and thank you for listening. We'll see you all right here next time on Terrifying and True.